Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode 118 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike, and that is Gavin and Fia. And guys, have you ever been really, really happy that you don't have to do anything in the summer?
No,
Yes.
because I've had to do things in the summer.
Yeah, Fia, you have? You felt that feeling before?
I mean, like, in the college days, yeah.
Exactly. It's incredible when you can continue that feeling for the rest of your working life. Because friends, we're recording this on Monday. I just got back from a flight at 1 a.m. I got back from a bachelor party in Puerto Rico. We had a great time. And they were all talking about, oh, yeah, I've got to go to work on Monday. Oh, I've got to do this and that. And I'm just sitting there laughing to myself like, I don't have to do anything. I've got a couple weeks to recover from this.
Yeah,
So,
I definitely can relate a little bit, even though it's not quite, whole summer off. But so at the university that I work at, we just had the president's sort of annual address to like faculty and staff today. And so I didn't realize quite how many holidays we get, or like holiday days. But on top of, I get 4 weeks vacation, just like as a base for my pay. We also get, I think, like 20 or 22 like holidays.
Wow.
So we get 2 weeks off around Christmas. We get the whole week of Thanksgiving off. And all the various holidays and things throughout the year on top of that. So it's pretty great working in education. Can't complain.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But speaking of colleges, that you're going to be talking a lot about them today. So last episode, we mentioned that next episode, this episode, was going to be about tails. The thing that your cat likes to, raise at you and show you their butt, and your dog likes to wag and knock things over. It's not going to be that, as you might have seen by the title. Today, we're going to be talking about one of the less fun parts of science, and that is student loans in the United States. And there's a fun sort of story that actually sort of reconnects to the podcast, tangentially anyway, about why I was inspired to sort of change the episode. And Mike, do you remember? It was probably like 5 or 6 years ago at this point. We were driving out to Rochester.
Oh, I remember that.
Where we almost died in a car accident.
Yep.
And
Jeez.
it was we didn't actually get in an accident, but it was raining really bad, and the car hydroplaned, and we almost crashed into the guardrail, but we spun out pretty bad. Mm-hmm. And this
wasn't
car
even
was
going like particularly fast, for the record.
No.
So like, slow down if it's raining. Like that was one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me.
Oh God, me too. And especially because I wasn't driving.
Yes, I was in control. I was in control the whole time, so at least I had that. I felt like I could do something about the situation. Gavin,
I was like, Jesus, take the wheel.
Yep.
But
which means I'm Jesus in the situation. But okay,
that's true.
Yep.
But on that trip, Mike showed me this podcast that I've been listening to ever since, called The Weeds.
Yes.
Which, if you're not familiar, The Weeds is a very, as the name might imply, a very in the weeds, like public policy podcast, talking about different things, different like acts of Congress, different judicial things, basically getting very in depth on various different policies that the government has. And there was one a couple weeks ago titled, let me pull it up here, Who Broke Student Loans? And I thought, hey, my student loans are kind of broke. They're making me broke. So I listened to the episode, and I learned things about my student loans that I did not know before, about why I am more screwed than I probably should have been. And I thought I'd like to just sort of have a conversation about, at least in the United States, what it takes to be a scientist, a professional scientist anyway. And talk about college and student loans, because all three of us have kind of different, experiences with it. And I also got some sort of international perspectives as well. I text some colleagues that had their education in the UK, and then I also looked up a bunch of stuff about other various places around the world. So I just want to compare why the US is losing so bad in so many things to so many other countries. But yeah, so I guess real quick, before we get into the meat of the episode, we'll go ahead and do our typical opening shtick. But I guess, Fia, hit us with some housekeeping.
Yeah, so don't forget to rate the show on whatever platform you listen to us on, and to follow us on Twitter, Facebook. Wait, do we call Twitter X now, or is it still
Just
called
call it
Absolutely
Twitter?
Twitter.
not.
I refuse.
Absolutely not.
Absolutely. Yeah, no.
Okay, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube to give us feedback about the show and any future topics you would like to hear. And if you would like to be a guest on the show, be sure to fill out the guest form, which all of this could be found in the show notes. And so, I guess, what's the next episode topic for next time, Gavin?
You might have heard this before. We're going to be talking about Tales.
What?
Yeah. So we're just basically taking what should have been this episode and moving it until next episode. But also, just as a quick side note, I put off updating my Twitter app for a really long time because I didn't want it to say X. So I had it for a solid 2 weeks after it changed, and then it auto updated, and now I just have this stupid X on my phone.
Yeah, Fia,
Anyway.
I mean, you made me upset just by even asking that question, because now I'm thinking about it.
Sorry.
It's just, I mean, we're not doing tech policy here, but wow.
No.
But
Anywho,
wow,
yes,
is right.
That will be that'll be next episode. But Mike, what happened today in history?
Who do I think can do this? Fia.
Who do I think can do this? Oh no.
Fia.
Yes.
Can you name all 4 Beatles?
Oh no, absolutely not. Maybe
Can
is
you name
John
any
Lennon?
of the Beatles?
John Lennon.
John Lennon's one of them.
That's
Yep,
it. That's
you got
all I
one.
got.
Okay,
That's it.
Gavin.
Paul McCartney,
Paul.
Ringo Starr,
Ringo Starr.
and George Harrison.
Correct. Do you know which of those 4 was not an original member of the Beatles?
Ooh, I don't actually.
Yeah, this is something.
My instinct is to just say Ringo, because I know he's kind of like the left out Beatle.
Aww.
Your instinct is correct, as it turns out. So when the kind of history and formation of the Beatles is something very interesting. There was a band called the Quarrymen that sort of morphs into the Silver Beatles and then the actual Beatles. And there was a guy by the name of Pete Best that was drumming in a lot of those cases and was the original drummer for the Beatles. He winds up leaving, was fired. I don't know the exact situation, but today in history was when Ringo Starr officially replaced Pete Best, and he played his first official concert 2 days later on I guess that would be August 18th in 1962. And Pete Best kind of became famous for not being famous in a lot of ways, because he is the answer to a number of trivia questions of who is the original drummer of the Beatles. And I cannot imagine being part of the formation of, not just like a big band or something, the bass player for a band that had one hit, but just like the biggest band that has ever existed.
Right. It's not like you're saying, as much as I really enjoy the music, but Green Day, it's big band.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Especially, early 2000s and stuff, but it's not the Beatles,
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Right.
Yeah,
right. And so he gave I believe he gave an interview with David Letterman years and years later, because he's avoided a fair amount of media attention for obvious reasons. And it was it looked like it really pained the poor man, just that he was there, and then he was not, and did not get to partake in any of the success. So yeah, today in history was when Ringo Starr replaced Pete Best as the official drummer of the Beatles. Something that many casual fans, and I'm certainly no expert, but many casual fans don't even know that there was an original drummer of the Beatles. So there we go. That is our today in history.
Awesome. Thank you for that,
Nice.
Mike.
Yeah.
And Fia, maybe this is not the week you're doing it, but if I remember right, we're going to be starting to sort of transition Swamp Corner into something else. So I don't know if you want to talk about that, or if you want to save that for when we actually sort of launch that.
Yeah, we're gonna save that because I'm gonna wait until I've been in some seagrass.
Okay.
But yeah, for today in Swamp Corner, all I have to say is it's hot as heck, y'all. uh, I was trying to figure out what to talk about on this one, and so I just like went on the internet, and I found out that like today, our governor of Louisiana, John Bell Edwards, declared Louisiana in a state of emergency uh, because of the summer's record run of extreme heat, and this obviously be due to a number of emergency room visits, droughts, among other reasons. But yeah, it's extremely hot in the south, and it's been abnormally hot for a long time. I think we've had extreme heat warnings probably every single day for the past month, it seems like.
Oh.
And yeah, that's causing drought and significant drops in the Mississippi River's water level, which is adding stress to the water supplies and agriculture. And according to NOLA.com, there were at least 16 heat-related deaths in June and July in Louisiana, according...
That seems like too many.
Yeah, this is compared to an average of 10 per year. So that's still kind of a lot, but now...
10 per year, and there was 16 in July by itself?
In June and July, yeah.
June, okay, well, still, it's not like that.
Yeah, 2 months.
That's barely better.
Exactly. So, yeah, just extensive heat warning is just, it's intense here, and it's going to run through until early September. So, take home message for anybody dealing with this extreme heat: stay cool, drink water, and be alert for any signs of heat exhaustion, which include cool, moist skin, heavy sweating, dizziness, fatigue, rapid pulse, muscle cramps, nausea, headache in the heat.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of heat, also, just thinking about all the wildfires and stuff going on in Hawaii right now.
True, very true.
So, if you have any cent available to you to donate, definitely send some money their way or to some other heat mitigation efforts, because the world's certainly not getting colder. And I could go off on maybe at some point we'll do a bonus episode, not tonight because I know Mike's very tired. But about this weird thing, they changed the type of fuel that is used in cargo ships so that it emits less sulfur dioxide, which can cause acid rain, but it's also a pretty good basically reverses the greenhouse effect. It lets or not quite reverses, but so the greenhouse effect, sunlight gets in and then gets trapped. Sulfur dioxide prevents sunlight from getting in the first place. But because the sulfur dioxide is no longer being emitted by these ships, particularly over the North Atlantic, temperatures are just skyrocketing right now because they no longer have this blanket of protection. So it's like, yeah, climate change is actually currently worse than we thought it was because we were missing this signal from this sulfur dioxide. So things are real bad and are going to get real worse. So, yeah. Anyway, on that happy note, let's talk about extreme generation crushing debt, shall we? So, real quick, because I know my story is going to be a little longer and more complicated with my student loans. If you guys don't mind, why don't you talk about sort of your student loan situation? So all three of us have master's degrees, so we're all roughly equivalent in that sense. But yeah, I guess so. Mike, go ahead and tell us about your loan stuff. Money is always kind of complicated, so if there's anything you don't want to tell the world, feel free to not share that.
Yeah, so when I was in high school, fortunately, my father had retired from his original job and went to go work at Syracuse University. primarily so that way his kids could all get tuition-free education.
Smart.
It worked out particularly well for my younger brothers, who got essentially full rides. But because he had only started working there recently, I had to wait until middle of my sophomore year to be
Okay.
tuition free. So I only had tuition from my first couple of semesters. It wound up being about $40,000. Um, one of those was a loan from Sally Mae with 12% interest. That as soon as I got a real job, I
Yep.
got my 20 grand and I paid it all off all at once. And then I still have one more loan from the Department of Ed that I haven't been paying on for the last number of years because I haven't had to.
Sure.
That is still roughly in that 20 grand ballpark. That was my undergrad. As far as grad school goes, I paid for that out of pocket.
Okay.
And I
'Cause
very nearly wasn't
in
able
New
to.
York, you can do that part-time while you're teaching, right?
So you can if your undergrad is in education. My undergrad was
Right.
not in education, so I had to do a full year of a master's program. And I subbed and did other stuff, but I functionally didn't have a real job at that point, and I had $0 in my bank account. Like I had to, without going into too many details, there was a brief moment when I thought I wasn't going to be able to pay it all off. I was able to pay them all off. I had $0 in my bank account at the end of it, and so I got tuition or loan free from my master's program. But it did, fortunately, I was able to get a job right afterwards. Otherwise, I would have had some
Right.
serious problems.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's my story. I got out, probably better than most other art school dropouts wind up. I'd have to say.
So like
So
total, give or take, you said around 20.
about 40 grand total in loans.
Okay.
With two different loans, is what it ended up being, and then yeah, that's just in loans that I have to pay back after school, not including anything that I was paying during that actual time.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, that's my story. I assume Fia's going to go next.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, for various reasons that will remain personal, I did not have any to take out any student loans, and so for my undergrad, I came out with no debt, and then for my master's, I got a graduate assistantship that essentially paid for most of my tuition, and I had to pay like student fees every semester, which like was about $1,000
Right.
a semester, and I just paid that out of pocket. And yeah, that was pretty much it for me. And then when I'm going to do my PhD, it'll essentially be the same thing. I got a assistantship that will pay for my tuition, and then I will just have to pay student fees.
Gotcha. Yeah, and that's pretty typical for, especially if you're going to grad
Right.
school in the sciences at especially relatively larger universities. Like LSU is pretty big.
Yeah.
And what is it? University of Florida, right?
Yep. Mhm. Yep.
Yeah, so two fairly large state universities.
Yeah.
That's pretty typical. So, and I would have Liz talk about hers as well because she also has a bachelor's degree, but she's currently at work. But she also does not have any student loans, mostly because, like, for her particular instance, she worked the whole time and also lived at home and drove 45 minutes to a pretty reputable university for what she went to college for, and worked super super hard and worked full time the entire time she was in college and paid it off herself. So
That's awesome.
thankfully, because otherwise we would just be absolutely destroyed right now. So currently I owe, give or take, a little below $75,000 in student loans. Yeah. My monthly payment is about $630. Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah. And so that is even given that I tried my absolute best to do what was sort of the responsible thing. I went to community college where I lived at home. Well, for the second year, I lived in the dorms, but because I was an RA, I lived there for free. So I didn't pay for housing either of those 2 years. I graduated from community college completely loan free. After that, I went to a state school, which for anybody who's outside the U.S. are generally cheaper. I know that kind of varies from country to country, which are cheaper or not, surprisingly.
Right.
But so I went there for 3 years, and was a resident assistant in the dorms there too, for 5 of those 6 semesters, which also paid for my room. I also worked in the dining hall, a few days a week to make some money. And I don't remember what exactly my total was when I graduated from there. But I do know when I went to grad school that I got a partial tuition waiver, so not the full waiver, but my grad stipend, that I got paid for teaching classes and stuff, was like on paper more than my tuition. So it's like on paper, I came out slightly positive in terms of just like number of dollars, but the tuition is up front, whereas I get paid, I think it was like 3 times a semester or something. So I needed to take out loans for that. And for those ones in particular, my parents didn't want to co-sign. They co-signed on my undergrad loans to get me a better interest rate. But for this one, they were like, well, it's grad school now. You're out of college. Why don't you try it on your own? And if they deny you, we'll co-sign. In my first year of grad school, I had I think it was about $10,000 loan with 10% interest.
Jeez.
Yep. And
That's
it
huge.
was
It's just not, and like just very briefly with that and the loan that I had to take out, going to undergrad, just like when people are like, oh, I can't believe people would take out a loan, like, you're more like, what's
What
the
choice
other
do you
option?
have?
Like,
yeah,
right. Like there's a little bit of just like F you, what are you going to do about it? Like, it's like that is part of the issue when it comes to stuff like this is what you get.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was funny. I'm glad that you brought up Sally Mae, Mike, because we're about to get a little
I'm
in the
not,
weeds.
but okay.
Well, we're going to get in the weeds of education policy here for a second. So for anybody who is outside the U.S. or has not used Sally Mae in particular, Sally Mae used to be run by the federal government. That is what they used to distribute, sort of like the user end of the federal loan system. And in fact, when my older sister went to college, it was still owned and run by the federal government. It was in the process of being privatized, but when my sister was going through, it was still federally run. Which means that because it's federally run, that the government sort of subsidizes it and basically allows for lower interest rates because the government is like backing the loan, more or less. However, in the summer of 2014, is when Sally Mae was fully privatized. However, my parents, neither of my parents went to college themselves, and I want to make it clear, I am not trying to, just blame my parents, nor am I trying to be like, oh, poor Gavin, he has debt. This is just the realistic situation of many thousands of people our age in the U.S. right now.
Right.
And so my parents, they didn't know exactly what to do. They were just like, well, we went with Sally Mae for my sister. Why not just use it for Gavin? The FAFSA, which is sort of the thing you enter all your information in to tell the federal government, hey, I'd like some loans, please. And the government is like, your family makes this much money. Here's how much they should be able to give you per year for loans. Here's how much loans we will give you. The FAFSA said my parents should be able to give me like $10,000 a year for college, which we absolutely couldn't afford. And therefore gave me very little in like federal loans. So my parents just did the rest through Sally Mae because they thought that was still somehow federal, but it was not. And the difference between those federal loans and Sally Mae is that federal loans most of them don't accrue interest while you're in school. And that was the kicker for me, is that the entire time, me putting on that extra year of undergrad and then doing the 2 years of grad school, all of my loans were just continually gaining interest. And so by the time I graduated with my master's, I had like a little over $80,000. And I refinanced basically immediately to get rid of that one 10% loan. And yeah, so here I am. I'm going to be paying those loans until I'm 40, which is
Wow.
crazy.
Did you
Yeah, so
know
I'm just...
that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Did you know at the time that this loan was going to be accruing interest while you were in school?
I don't know, to be honest. I don't really remember.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
for especially my first year of undergrad, like, I was there, like, sat down with my mom, but my mom did it mostly because she's the one who did it for my sister.
right,
Um,
yeah.
and so I don't know, truthfully.
Hmm.
I think at some point I had looked at my stuff and must have realized it at some point.
Yeah,
But then I was like, well, it's just easier to have all my loans in one place. And then also, I don't know why I wasn't immediately no to the 10% loan, or why I didn't ask my parents, because that was easily like 4% higher than what I got when my parents were cosigners.
right.
Um, so fortunately, I refinanced when, before interest rates went up, with all this inflation stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So I refinanced them almost 2 years ago now. Um, got a nice, I think it's like 4.25% or something, which is, considering what it was, really good. But yeah, so that is my story of how privatizing things that were once owned and run by the government hurts people. Hurts
Yeah,
people real bad. Um,
yeah,
and so the reason why we're talking about this in general is because this really hurts science. And this might seem kind of counterintuitive, but I feel like it shouldn't be, because the fewer people can get into science, that just means the less science is being done, and the more, everyone talks about diversity and stuff, but you want different types of brains thinking about science because they think about it in different ways. And
yeah,
generally, at least in the US, the people with money tend to be fairly similar to one another. And, it just means less people can get into science, which at
right.
the end of the day is bad, and why, if you look at basically every metric in terms of research or pretty much anything else, every other developed country is just kicking the hell out of the US. um, and so, just for fun, I decided to look up what the education system is kind of like in some other countries, and then, like I said earlier, got some sort of anecdotes from some friends over in Europe.
Hmm.
So let's do some world traveling, shall we? We'll start off with the other most expensive one in the world, which is the United Kingdom. Um, that's where most of my friends that I talk to were from. And unlike most other European countries, there is actually tuition and like fairly substantial tuition. Um, so, for example, let's see. One of them says that their loan for undergrad was about $3,000 per year, and then they took out an extra $3,000 per year for just like rent, food, stuff like that. So they said around total $18,000 for their undergrad, which I feel like that's fairly typical of like a state school.
Yeah,
PhDs and grad degrees work a little differently over there. So another friend who was in a PhD program said it was about $2,000 per year, and for part time anyway. I'm not quite sure what it was if you were to do it full time, but I know here in the U.S. a PhD is minimum 4 years. Your first 2 years you take classes similar to how you did during your master's while you're developing your research project, and then the years 3, 4 plus are doing your research and usually teaching as well. And in the UK, that's not really the thing. They just cut the first 2 years of the classes because they assume you did that during your master's. So
that's nice.
typical PhDs, yeah, it's and I actually met somebody who was from the UK who was doing their PhD here, and they were like, "Yeah, I didn't know that before I signed the paperwork." And I'm like, "Well, maybe." In that case, I'm like, "You should have done it a little better." But I think I just wanted to come to the US and see what it was like. But yeah, she was kind of surprised by that. But also weirdly in the UK, it kind of varies from country to country within the UK. So for example, in England, all public universities have like a cap on how much they can charge tuition. So it's capped at about $13,000 in England. In Northern Ireland, it's as low as $6,000 a year. And this is all to like, people who live there. And then in Scotland, it's free to Scotlanders.
What?
Yep.
That's awesome.
Let's see. Lots of other countries in the, especially the EU, are free or extremely low cost to EU member states. And also they include Switzerland, usually, even though Switzerland's not in the EU. They just kind of like, Switzerland, I guess you're here. You might as well, we'll be nice to you.
Mm-hmm.
In Germany, it is completely tuition free for EU member states, and it's only $3,500 a year for non-EU students. So if I wanted to go do a bachelor's in Germany, the tuition would only be $3,500 a year, which is considerably less than even like an in-state tuition state school.
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah. Know that firsthand.
Yeah. Let's see. France public universities varies somewhere between $200 and $700 a year. In France and a few countries, your tuition is based on what major you are.
Huh.
So if you are, say, a geology major versus, say, like a fine arts major or something, you pay different tuition. I didn't, go into the depths of which ones pay what or whatever. But I just thought that was an interesting way to think about it.
Yeah.
I assume that all of these figures are being converted from whatever the local currency is, whether it's euros or otherwise, into
Yep,
dollars,
this is all USD. Yeah.
Okay.
Let's see. Switzerland is one of the more expensive places. $450 to somewhere around $4,000 a year. Again, this is all for locals. Finland, free for EU, free for non-EU. So if I wanted to go take a college course in Finland, it would be free if I took it in Finnish or Swedish. But if I took it in English, or if it was a PhD program, that's free as well, even to non-EU folks. But if I took it in, undergraduate classes in English, it would cost money. So if you're an American who speaks Finnish or Swedish, you have a free education over there.
I wonder how much it would cost to like take classes, take a number of classes, become at least proficient enough in one of those languages, and then travel over there and begin the education process.
Cheaper than a college degree, I would imagine.
I would think so, but now I'm curious. Yeah,
there's so much free online learning tools for like learning other languages that I think.
That's true.
I mean, that's a separate thing. Yeah. If you could do that, but
totally.
I mean, like taking actual classes, at like a community college or something, or
right, yeah,
if that was available.
I don't know. I feel like you'd be kind of hard pressed to find a community college with Finnish and Swedish. My community college only had, I think, Latin, French, and Spanish. Maybe German. I think there was German as well. Let's see. Moving outside the EU then, because a lot of the EU countries are something to that effect. Australia, very complicated system. However, price generally, say if I wanted to go to Australia, it would cost about the same as like an in-state tuition college would here. So it's not really cheaper for an international student. But for a domestic Australian student, they sort of break it up again into bands depending on what sort of major it is. But for a geology degree, for example, it would be capped at roughly $5,400 a year. Let's see. Same part of the world, New Zealand. Similar system to Australia. A bit more expensive, somewhere between $6,000 and $15,000 a year.
Oh.
Brazil. Couldn't find a lot of like cost information, but their public universities are tuition free. However, it seems like over 75% of students go to the private universities. I don't know why you would if it was free, unless the public ones are just kind of really bad. I don't know. And I'm mostly just doing this picking countries now that have a lot of paleontology, just for reference. Let's see. South Africa. You pay for the course, not necessarily per year, but if you were to take the equivalent of sort of full time, it would work out somewhere between $260, not 260,000, 260,
Wow,
and $4,000.
that's incredible.
And then lastly, of all the countries that I looked up, China. I feel like that one's particularly important given just the general geopolitical climate these days between the US and China. For foreigners, so again, if I wanted to go to China and study, it would cost me between $2,500 and $5,000 per year. I couldn't find good numbers for Chinese citizens, but just given their economic system, I would assume that it's free. So, yeah, that is just generally what the rest of the world is looking like. And personally, I think in the next 10 to 15 years, we are going to really see science in the United States really struggle. Just because we are not investing in it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you're putting in the money for, research and development at places like SpaceX. And I think that, honestly, as much as I don't particularly, speaking of, X earlier, as much as I don't particularly like Elon Musk personally, I think it's good that the US government, puts some kind of money into the public or private sector like that, investing in research and development at different companies. However, that only helps the people that are already there.
Yeah. Right.
But I mean, is this like a unique to science kind of problem? Because I mean, I feel like the higher education, the costs and barriers to higher education kind of affect all of higher education. Is this a science specific kind of problem, or is this just a higher ed problem that science is only a part of?
I mean, I feel like this is science. I feel like is probably the best case scenario, because science generally has sort of a tangible output, whereas investing in things like the arts has a much less visible outcome necessarily, as much as art is kind of like a visual medium. But it's like, if you're investing in the education of engineers, the government can be like, hey, they're going to build us supercomputers that can compete with China, or they're going to build us weapons that can compete with, our enemies. And if you tell that to taxpayers, they're like, yes, do that.
Mm-hmm.
But if the US government is investing in, this person learning graphic design, I feel like people generally would have a problem with their at least Americans would have a problem with their, taxes going to that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying there.
And, many parts of science have a much more tangible output than, say, paleontology. For example, investing in, biology programs that can help with medicines, that can help with, different biomedical engineering things. So developing new medicines, developing new treatments for different things. In geology, there's, mineral resources with all the different, green power things that we're, trying to invest in. You need a ton of geologists and mining engineers and geological engineers out there to go find all this stuff and make sure that we take it out of the ground, in a cost-effective way. Paleontology is just kind of fun. There's no, as much as I love paleontology, there's really relatively little economic value in it,
Mm-hmm.
But this is, I'm mostly just framing this in a science context because that's what I know, um, but it's like, if we can't even fund the thing that people would want, or that they could understand the government getting some kind of return on investment on, we're sure as heck not gonna fund, arts as much as we should.
Right.
And so this is just sort of a, hey, I listened to a podcast and I got frustrated, and I wanted to share my frustration with my podcast.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that's hard to raise a constituency for in order to like get votes for something in order to change the way the policy works. That's, I mean,
yeah, and it's so ironic. So I mentioned earlier that the president of my university gave his like yearly address today, and he said something about like they're trying to increase our endowment. And so, for context, I work at a small private liberal arts college. So tuition, he said something, I don't remember his exact words, but he said probably within the next 5 years or so, tuition's going to be up around $100,000.
Holy crap.
That's a year, to be clear.
Yeah. And he said, granted, our endowment is quite large. So we use that to help put out, provide scholarships and things like that. And I'm like, why not just use the endowment to just lower tuition then?
Hey, how about that?
Right.
But yeah, they said they wanted to like increase by like 50% or something, or something with a 50. I don't remember. I was just too stunned by the tuition being $100,000 to listen to the next few sentences that he said. But yeah, so this is just sort crazy. Of a call to any folks who vote, which is hopefully all of you. Think about these kinds of things. When you go to vote, or when you send your kid to college, or when you yourself go to college. These are the things that are sort of the reason why millennials aren't buying houses and stuff like that. All the, millennial memes and stuff from a handful of years ago. And now Gen Z, who are going to have it even worse. But yeah, I know personally, me and Liz have been looking at trying to buy a house around here, and we kind of just can't. Even though she has no loans, we have between our two cars, we have one car payment, and then my student loans, and the mortgage lenders just say, here's what house you can afford, and there's very few houses that are like livable that would cost that much with a mortgage.
Right.
And so this is, again, I'm not trying to be like, oh, poor Gavin. That's not the goal here. I just want to sort of make it clear. When your scientists can't eat, you can't have scientists anymore. You can't do science when you don't have food.
Yeah. True.
And that has ripple effects down to, every facet of life.
Exactly. But yeah, so happy Wednesday.
Gavin, I assume we'll be able to include the link to the original the Weeds episode.
Yes, absolutely.
To put in there,
they break it down in a much more understandable way than I did with the whole Sally Mae stuff. But it's like, I did not know. I knew that Sally Mae was private, but I didn't sort of make the connection that like it had been. And then the timeline was like, basically as soon as my sister graduated with her 4-year degree is when it became private. So it's like, my particular situation affects vanishingly few people, where it's like, oh, your older sibling, had Sally Mae when it was federal, but 3 years later, you got Sally Mae when it was private. I feel like that affects extremely few people, but again, that's just the consequences of elected officials, trying to privatize things. And then looking at all these other countries that have all of this public funding for their universities. And like I said, within the next 10 to 15 years, it's really going to be not pretty for the state of, science and just academia in the United States in general. Which academia has many, many, many problems. And this is just one of them among a long list. But this just goes further in excluding people who can't afford it. And like I said earlier, as much as diversity is thrown around all the time, it's like you want science or diversity in science because you want people to be thinking about all these new problems that we're going to face, like climate change, like wildfires, in different ways. And if everybody has the same background, that being in the US, wealthy, and then typically wealthier people are generally white, and, college being so prohibitively expensive just goes to further, science being a monoculture, which is not good for anybody.
Right.
Anyway.
It's the real downer of an episode.
It sure is. But next week...
We do a lot of those.
We sure do. Fortunately, we don't have any more big extinctions coming down the pike until we eventually... We already did an
I really hope you're right about that.
Well, we did an episode already about the 6th extinction. We did that quite a while ago.
Yes.
But maybe we'll revisit that. Depending on how long this podcast goes on.
And maybe we will. But until then, this has been episode 118 of I Wish You Were Dead, a podcast about things that used to be alive. My name is Mike. That was Gavin and Fia. And hopefully we're all still around to see you in a couple of weeks when we can talk about Tales. But until then, take care, everybody.